What is going on, guys? It is Hart, going to be breaking down the Week 5 Sunday main slate here on DraftKings, talking through some of my favorite plays, some core plays, some value plays we can look to get different. This is going to be a first look, an early look, so obviously we're going to have to wait on a bunch of injury news and kind of key things that will come out through the week to help us build our lineups come Sunday. So make sure to hit that like button and subscribe. Check out my Twitter at HartDFS, and I will get right into this breakdown. So for this week 5, I think if we take a step back and look at the past 2 weeks, it's been all about just kind of loading in the top 4 to 5, maybe the top 6 chalky guys, and just getting different with like two or three kind of lower owned players. I think that is kind of what has worked the past 2 weeks in terms of the Millie Maker. But I feel like this week there's only 10 games, so there's a little bit of less options across the board. But as well as it's very, very, very cheap pricing for every position. So it's going to be very easy to pay up for pretty much all the guys you want. And we haven't really seen that yet in a slate since week 1. But obviously with week 1, you don't really know what's going to happen in terms of these games, the players. And now that we're 4 weeks in, obviously this is week 5, we have a lot more data and analysis to go after. So if you take a quick look here, highest quarterback is Lamar at 7,300 and Jaden Daniels. They're both questionable. It looks like Lamar right now is not good to go, so we'll have to wait and see if that happens. But yeah, I mean, it's pretty much going to be one of those things where the mid-range to lower range for quarterbacks looks really, really appealing in the 5K range. If we look at running backs, kind of the same thing here, right? Jonathan Taylor's the most expensive at 8K, and there's a lot to like here in the 7K, even down into the 5K range. There's a lot to like. So one of those weeks where there's a lot to like in the 5 to 6K range, which really makes it easy to pay up for 1 to 2 to 3, if not 4 of the top guys there in the running back and wide receiver situations. As you can see, wide receiver, Amon-Ra, Jamar Chase, and then we get down into the 6K range already. And then for tight end, it's, the top 2 main guys there. And then it's just, pretty much cheap options. So as you can see, there's a lot to like here in terms of pricing, very, very soft. So a lot to like here in this kind of first look and for this week 5 slate breakdown. So starting off with the quarterbacks for this early look. Right now, we're waiting on the news for Lamar Jackson and Jaden Daniels. Obviously, if Lamar Jackson can't go, it's going to be Cooper Rush, which feels really, really gross against a pretty solid Houston defense. So we have to wait for that news. And then Jaden Daniels, we'll have to see if he plays. If he doesn't, once again, it'll be Marcus Mariota, which I feel like is a fine play once again. But if Jaden Daniels is back, I'll have interest there. Moving on down a little bit more, Hurts looks fine there as like a contrarian option. Obviously, we know the upside there with him. They've been bad, but they're still 4-0, and it's kind of weird there in that sense. But still, one of those guys who's going to get at least 20 fantasy points per game, it feels like, every single time, if not more. So he looks good there, even though it's a tough matchup against Denver, but at least it's at home for them. Moving on down to Jared Goff. Going to be one of the highest owned quarterbacks on the slate just because of that matchup there against the Bengals. Obviously, it's a team we want to target. We just hope that they can keep it close, or that Jared Goff can go off enough where he puts up, at least 20 fantasy points. As we saw against Cleveland, he had a good game. It just one of those things, Cleveland couldn't keep it close, and he only put up 13 fantasy points. But, yeah, I mean, it's just that matchup. Evan's going to want to target him. Got a lot of people you can stack with him, so he's going to be one of the better options in terms of quarterbacks you can look to for this slate. Justin Herbert, I have interest there. It's just they lost Joe Alt. They're all pro linemen. They don't have Slater. Obviously, they didn't have him since the start of the season. It's just that offensive line's in shambles. He's starting to get pressured a ton. But obviously, they're going to have to throw the ball a little bit more, I believe. So 6,100 for him is a fine play. Along with Jared Goff, Dak Prescott going to be one of the highest owned quarterbacks on the slate. They have the number 1 offense in terms of yards per game, but their defense is the worst in terms of yards per game that they're giving up. So best offense, worst defense in terms of yards per game in the league. Obviously, that's fantastic for DFS purposes. And as we saw last game against Green Bay, Dak Prescott has been playing probably at an MVP level. He's been playing really, really well despite their record and kind of what the box score shows there. So at 6,000, he looks fantastic against one of those teams who looks god-awful. The Jets, another team we want to target. Moving on down a little bit more. Once again, it feels just like a Justin Fields spot. Going to be one of the highest owned quarterbacks on the slate, but for good reason. As you can see from last night, if you guys didn't watch the game, they were pretty brutal. The Jets are just awful, as most people know. But that offense was just absolutely god-awful there. It wasn't until I think it was at the end of the second or maybe the third quarter where it was like 4th and 3, and he broke off like a 50-yard touchdown rush, which helped him get back in the game a little bit more. And then they ended up putting up a little bit more points there at the end. But it was kind of one of those things where the Dolphins were up. They're fine giving up points and yards because they knew they had the game secured. So that's the issue there, is like this offense is god awful. The defense is god awful. Like, can they keep it close enough where Justin Fields is able to get to enough value? But at 5,600, it's not going to take much to do that. We know the rushing upside there. We know he can throw for 200 yards plus. They didn't get Garrett Wilson involved until the end of the game, so I expect him to come out, throw the ball a ton. So absolutely love him there. I mean, he's going to be super popular, but for good reason, going against that Dallas defense, worst defense in the league right now in terms of yards per game. So we want to target them. And then moving on down a little bit more, CJ Stroud, I will call him out, 5,200 going against the Baltimore Ravens, one of those defenses that's been surprisingly god awful. So that could be an interesting spot there. A little bit more, I will mention Bryce Young, 4,700 against Miami, another team we like to target. Very, very cheap, even though he's not been the best. And he just really needs a game script where he's throwing the ball 40 times, if not more. That's where he seems to do his best. Can we get that? Who knows? But yeah, he really hasn't flashed like a consistent upside, but it's just very, very cheap to get him at 4,700. You compare him with Tet, who I think is 5,700. So all in all, you're getting the top two, like a quarterback who could throw it for 30, 40 plus times, and a wide receiver one for like $10,000 on the slate. Looks very appealing. And yeah, I mean, I think that's it for the quarterbacks as right now, as like an early look. Moving on to the running back situation, the top four look great. I expect Saquon Barkley to be the lowest owned of the top four just because you have Jonathan Taylor, absolute workhorse, seeing 20-plus attempts, looks fantastic. Jahmyr Gibbs in the smash spot once again. The workload has been shifting more and more towards him and less of David Montgomery, so it's just really hard not to get to him at that price tag in that matchup. And then Devon Achane, obviously, I think he gets more into the realm of the CMC where he's going to see close to 8 targets a game from the backfield with no more Tyreek Hill for probably the rest of the season. So looking like the two best options in terms of running back plays just because of the pass catching ability and the rushing upside there. But I absolutely love Saquon. One of these games, he's going to absolutely explode for the classic Saquon, like 30, 35-plus fantasy point game. It's just they have not been blocking well. The team overall has just been pretty poor, even though they're 4-0. It feels really weird. It's a weird situation. But, yeah, they just have not been good at blocking. Hasn't really been having those explosive runs because of that blocking. But I would not be surprised, even though it's a tough team, a tough defense in Denver. They're playing at home. One of these weeks, Saquon's going to pop off, and I would not be surprised if it's this week. So I'm going to be overweight to the field on him. I absolutely love Bucky Irving there at 7,200. One of those running backs who's been flying under the radar, but he's been seeing a massive workload the past 3 weeks, going for 20-plus attempts in every single one. Once again, really like him. It's just not the best matchup, but still, it's him, Egbuka, Chris Godwin. They have really no one else, so they're going to throw him the ball a ton, and they're going to give him a bunch of rushing attempts. He's been really, really good. Moving it down a little bit more, Ashton Genty, I called that out last week, a spot we want to target. Obviously, he was decently popular, but it was one of those where we really needed to hammer him just because he was going against the Bears smash spot, and it worked out fantastically there. 37.5 fantasy points, so I was really happy with that. It's going to him there last week. I don't think I'm going to chase this week. Just a little bit too pricey. Like, I'd rather pay $1,000 more or for a guy like Gibbs, or $700 more for Achane, or a little bit more for Barkley, or pay down, really, because there's a lot to like there for cheaper running backs. Moving on down a little bit more, obviously Hampton's getting a good workload out of the backfield, especially with catching some balls, getting targets. It's just, what's going to happen with that offensive line? Are they going to pass the ball a little bit more? Moving on down a little bit more, Cam Scotabo ran 25 times in that last game there. Good matchup against the Saints, so he's a solid option. I really like Chuba. It feels gross, but another one of those, running backs who's kind of gone under the radar in terms of his workload. Like, he's seen 15 attempts per game pretty much, and they're getting blown out, right? Like, most of the games. So if there's a close game or they're up, like, he's going to have a good game. So 5,800, I think he's very, very intriguing. Breece Hall, once again, is just too cheap here in this matchup. And now that Braylon Allen is probably out for multiple weeks, injuring his knee, Breece Hall looks like an absolute smash spot here against the Dallas defense, who's given up just a ton of yards, especially to running backs. So he looks fantastic there. Moving on down a little bit more, Tony Pollard. I know it doesn't feel great, but the Cardinals are one of those teams I feel like you can easily target because it's just Kyler, right? Like, Kyler he turns the ball over, can throw multiple picks. This team has been god awful. The offense has been god awful, but he's still been putting up respectable scores in the sense of them being blown out, and he's still getting a huge workload. So there's going to be games where they're up. There's going to be games that they win. And at 5,400, even though that Tajay Spears is back, he's an interesting look. Woody Marks, I'll mention him. Obviously had a massive workload. That was just more so a dart throw. Obviously, he was kind of trending towards more so, higher usage, but still at 5,400, I don't think there's really a need to get to him in that matchup against Baltimore, even though it's a team we want to target defensively. It's just there's better options, right? If you can pay up a couple $100 more for guys who are the clear running back ones and just have more upside and just more data to support that. I will mention Monty, an interesting kind of pick here. I don't think many people are going to play him. They're going to go to Amon-Ra. They're going to go to Laporta, Jameson Williams, Jahmyr Gibbs. I think he's going to be the lowest owned of the bunch, probably at 5,200. And as we saw in that Baltimore game, like he has upside, has the ability to break off some big plays, and in a slate in a game that's going to be close to 50 game total. I do have interest in him. Moving on to the wide receivers. So for the wide receiver situation, as mentioned, kind of quickly going back, top quarterbacks: Goff, Dak Prescott, Justin Fields. Running backs, I think personally right now it's going to be Gibbs and Achane there, and Breece Hall. Moving on to the wide receiver situation right now, Amon-Ra looks fantastic in that spot. Obviously, if you're playing Jared Goff, you're going to play Amon-Ra. And I don't mind, doing a run back here at Ja'Marr Chase. Very expensive. Obviously, the past two games have been god-awful. They've been getting blown out. They look terrible. It just, the defense for the Lions is pretty solid, especially with Aiden Hutchinson. They get a lot of pressures, a lot of sacks. But that secondary is a secondary you can target. So I do have a good interest here in Ja'Marr Chase as a bounce-back spot. Not going to be my highest owned guy, but I will have, probably I'd probably be over the field in terms of ownership for him. Moving on down a little bit more. Absolutely love Nico Collins here in this matchup against Baltimore. One of my favorite wide receiver plays right now in this early week look. Obviously, if you're playing Dak Prescott, you're going to play George Pickens. It's just one of those plays where you don't feel the best playing him. Like, it's very weird. I don't know how to call it out. I think a lot of people see it when he plays. It's like, the effort is just not there. Even though he's doing well and he's producing, it just feels like he doesn't have the effort. Like one of his touchdowns, he kind of just fell in. Like he wasn't forcing his way in. It just kind of fell. It's just, I don't know, but 6,600, that matchup against the Jets, obviously playing Dak, who's one of the best quarterback plays. You're going to want to get to some George Pickens. Obviously, if there is no Terry McLaurin, Deebo Samuel looks pretty solid again there. Moving on down a little bit more, Garrett Wilson. I mean, if you're playing Justin Fields, Garrett Wilson, if you didn't watch the game, you're like, oh, he put up 20, had a good game. He wasn't involved until pretty much the third quarter. They just did not throw him the ball at all in the first half. They were just pretty bad. So expect them to come out this game, throw him the ball a ton in the first quarter, get him involved pretty early on there. 6,100. Once again, I keep harping on the fact, but the Dallas defense is the worst in the league in terms of yards per game given up. So for playing Fields, I'm totally fine with playing Breece Hall once again, and totally fine pairing that with Garrett Wilson. In terms of, more receivers down below, Cortland Sutton looks fantastic. Had a huge game last night. Went for 19. Just been a very, very solid and consistent wide receiver, and his price really hasn't changed. Quentin Johnson in the Chargers, I do think they're going to have to throw the ball a little bit more, even though they've been throwing it a decent amount. Ted McMillan against Miami, 5,700 looks cheap. Jacoby Myers could be a good bounce-back spot, even though, Geno Smith's been absolutely terrible. Ladd McConkey, one of my kind of one of those guys I was on a lot last week, and it didn't work out. I think I might have to accept defeat, and it sucks because he's angering one of my fantasy teams as the wide receiver too, alongside Puka, which obviously Puka's been fantastic. But yeah, having Ladd as your wide receiver too sucks. I'm going to have to make a trade because he just hasn't been involved. Like the stats are there. Everything's pointing to him having a breakout game soon. He's just been the third option. Arguably the fourth option behind Hampton. So it sucks. He's never breakout game soon here, but I just don't know if I can chase. There's just a lot to likeness around him. Like Jalen Waddle, no Tyreek Hill. I think that's an automatic play. So it's like if you're playing Waddle and Achane, it makes sense to get to Tua as a stacking option if you want to. I like Marvin Harrison. Once again, had a kind of a brutal first half, but he really turned it on in the second half there. Kind of made up for the fact, and it saw 10 targets. Like Kyler believes in him. I do think this could be a turning point. Had obviously a brutal 2 weeks going into that week 4 game. he had a few drops, just looked god awful. But then he scored that touchdown. You could see the sigh of relief he had, and he made a big play at the end too. So I have a good amount of interest in him at 5,400, wide receiver 1. Going up against the Tennessee Titans, he looks really, really appealing. Moving on down a little bit more, wide receiver 1 for the Colts, Michael Pittman, $5,100 feels really, really cheap. I will call out Devontae Smith. His price keeps going lower and lower. I know the offense has been terrible, but $5,000 for him, it just seems a little bit too cheap there. And I will mention Jameson Williams, $4,900. Obviously, one of those guys can go for 20, 30 plus, but for the most part, it's really boomer bust for him. But in this matchup, $4,900, if you're going to be getting to Jared Goff, you're going to want to be getting into some Jameson Williams. And even if you're not getting to Jared Goff, I think he can make for one of those boomer bust plays in the flex spot or as your wide receiver 3 at $4,900. I do have interest in him. And that's really it for the wide receiver situation. I will call it Christian Kirk as kind of a stacking option there if you're playing Nico Collins and CJ Stroud. But that's really it. Io Manuel is kind of wide receiver 1 for the Titans. I don't think we really need to get too cute there. Moving down to the tight ends. For the tight ends, obviously the top 2 look fantastic. Top 4 look fantastic. McBride, Bowers, Ferguson, and Warren. Obviously, Ferguson and Warren have been the best of the bunch so far. But yeah, I mean, we know the upside there with McBride. He's going to get peppered with targets. Bowers, I've been on the past 2 weeks, trying to be early in terms of the Brock Bowers, bounce back game. Hasn't happened yet. Geno Smith has been absolutely god awful, but I do believe it will happen here soon. So he's getting, healthier and healthier each week. I do one of those things, kind of like a lad, where they're just gonna have a huge game here soon, kind of like a Saquon, where I'm going to buy in. I'm going to be overweight. But, yeah, all 4 options in this range look great. I don't really think you need to get too cute here. You can get to some Laporta. You can get down a little bit more to a guy like where do you go? Tommy Trimble for Carolina. Saw 8 targets there as the tight end 1 if Sanders is still out. And then I will mention Mason Taylor here for the Jets. It was kind of his breakout game there. I saw 7 targets, 5 for 65 yards. I was hesitant. I didn't play him. I wish I did, just because I don't trust Fields that much in terms of throwing it to tight ends, especially when they have Garrett Wilson and Breece Hall. But yeah, he had a nice breakout game last night. They really don't have anyone else to throw it to, so he could be in line if you're looking for a cheaper tight end. But yeah, I'd rather stick with the top 4 guys, especially if we're going with Fields here. You're gonna want to bring it back with these Pickens or Ferguson. So we're gonna go for Ferguson there at 4,800. And then defenses, there's a lot of cheap defenses I like. I think the Raiders are fine, 2,600. I think you could get away with the Panthers, but I think I'd rather go to the Texans, especially if there's no Lamar Jackson. Texans looks great there, 2,400. Their defense has been really solid. I even like the Titans there, going against Kyler Murray, a guy who does give up the ball a ton. Even the Saints there. So there's a lot of cheap defenses to like here. Right now, we'll just say that we'll go with let's just go with Houston. 2,400 leaves us 5,100 left over for a wide receiver. And then in terms of that, I mean, you can get to Michael Pittman, you get to Devontae Smith, Jameson Williams. I kind of like that, so we'll throw that in. That's kind of the early look core breakdown and kind of the early look build for week 5. So I hope you guys liked the video. Hit that like button and subscribe. I will have a final look core play video coming out Saturday once we get all the news and kind of my final look plays of who I'm going to target depending on kind of ownership, the news we get, and all that good stuff. But yeah, right now, kind of really like this lineup. I don't know if it'll change much. We'll have to wait and see. But hope you guys liked the video. Hit that like button and subscribe, and I'll see you guys next video. Peace.